With the first pick in the 1997 WNBA draft, the Houston Comets select.
What if the WNBA's greatest dynasty and a generation of icons came not from a single draft night, but from a three-part, almost forgotten experiment no league had ever tried? August 30, 1997, Houston, Texas. The summit hums like a power plant as confetti sits coiled in cannons, waiting to be born. Cynthia Cooper, Houston Comets guard, 34 years old and still a mystery to many American fans, palms the ball near midcourt, eyes flicking like a metronome between the clock and Teresa Weatherspoon's stance. The scoreboard glows. Comets 65, Liberty 51. A number more feeling than fact as the final seconds drain. Across from Cooper, New York's heartbeat crouches, hands twitching, a last-ditch trap winding up that everyone knows is too late. The horn has not yet sounded, the future already has. The forgotten 1997 draft that created a generation of icons. The road to that scoreboard begins a year earlier, and it begins with gold. Summer 1996 turned women's basketball into a moving thesis statement. The U.S. national team had trained for months, barnstorming America, and then cut through the Atlanta Olympics with a kind of joyful ruthlessness that gave all the right people the same idea at the same time. This could work every summer in sold-out arenas on national television. Lissa Leslie, Sparks center and marketing Comet, Rebecca Lobo, Liberty star in waiting, the face of UConn's collegiate revolution, Cheryl Swoops, Comet's wing, a slashing, soaring emblem of possibility who already had what no woman in basketball had owned before her, a signature shoe. The NBA, newly flush with global reach, had the infrastructure, broadcast partners, arena relationships, promotional muscle, and a timeline. Launch in 1997, summertime, 8 franchises. The premise was as audacious as it was simple. The game was ready. The country just needed a schedule. The first problem would make any startup grin and flinch in the same breath. The player pool, deep and credible, wasn't just domestic. It was international, it was seasoned, and it was split. A rival league, the American Basketball League, had launched first in the winter, with higher salaries and a number of the national team anchors. Dawn Staley, Jennifer Azzi, Teresa Edwards, names that had defined the sport for a decade, were wearing ABL jerseys. The WNBA had launch timing, NBA support, and network windows. What it needed was parity wrapped in star power on day one. If the league tilted, skeptics would call the project a marketing play. If it scattered the stars, skeptics would call the basketball a sideshow. The WNBA had to build credibility while it built chemistry, and it had to do both within weeks. So the architects chose something that hardly anyone outside league offices would understand until it worked. Instead of one draft night, they created a 3-phase roster plan. Phase 1 would be an initial player allocation, stars married to markets, a braid of basketball logic and promotional sense. Phase 2 would be the elite draft, not for college prospects, but for proven professionals, international veterans, domestic pros who had carved their names overseas, pioneers whose very presence would lend the new league gravitas. Phase 3 would be a conventional college draft, the familiar doorway for fans, a pipeline connecting NCAA lore to pro reality. If it sounds like architecture, that's because it was. The WNBA was being built the way you build a bridge. Anchor points first, then load-bearing beams, then a roadway with a view. On allocation day, 3 basketballs sat on easels for the cameras, and the faces that would define the league smiled for their new cities. Lissa Leslie to Los Angeles, a perfect pairing, a 6'5" center in a town that wrote its skyline in steel and glass. Rebecca Lobo to New York, the most famous player in college hoops, moving to the country's biggest media market. And Cheryl Swoops to Houston, an athlete with a signature shoe and an open runway. Around that tripod, other allocations formed a map of style and identity. Teresa Weatherspoon, point guard with a linebacker's will, to New York. Ruthie Bolton, undersized and relentless, to Sacramento. Vicky Bullitt and Andrea Stinson to Charlotte. Elena Baranova, a stretch forward before the term had a passport, to Utah. Michelle Edwards and Janice Lawrence Braxton to Cleveland. Jennifer Gillam's scoring touch and Michelle Timms' pace to Phoenix. Penny Toller's leadership to LA. The teams didn't just get names, they got personalities.
Houston's picture included a twist. Swoops, the marketing engine, was pregnant and would be due late June.
She might miss much of the inaugural season, and when she returned, who knew what version of Swoops would arrive? The Comets were allocated another guard to help shoulder the early weight, a name that to casual fans might have sounded like a footnote, but to lifers sounded like a storm warning: Cynthia Cooper. Once part of USC's early 1980s juggernaut, Cooper had spent her prime years dominating Europe, where women's professional basketball had thrived quietly on execution and craft. She was 34, unguardable in the half-court, and hungry in the way only players who have waited too long can be hungry. In a moment, Houston, on paper, looked like the most interesting experiment in the room. A rookie-to-be at forward, a global mystery taking the reins, and a superstar mother-to-be who would arrive late. Phase 2, the elite draft, put meat on those bones. The Utah Stars used the first pick on Dina Head, a guard with poise and pedigree. Cleveland grabbed Isabelle Fijalkowski, the rugged French center who turned the paint into an assignment. Charlotte took Rhonda Mapp, a front-court anchor who would help define how the Sting won games. New York selected Kim Hampton, whose post footwork was more lesson than move, and then Vicki Johnson, equal parts quiet and lethal. Houston tapped Brazil's Yaneth Arcane, who had scored her way through international tournaments and would soon become one of the best sixth players in the sport. Los Angeles had a Deidre Charles and then something almost mythic in the second round: Zhang Haixia, the Chinese center, whose size and soft hands turned a Sparks front court into a tourist attraction and a basketball problem in equal measure. Phoenix brought in Nancy Lieberman, 39 years old, a legend whose name alone stitched together generations and whose presence on a roster made a promise no press release could make on its own. This league would honor its history as it built its present. The effect of the elite draft was immediate and visible. The initial allocation had given cities faces, the elite draft gave them styles. New York suddenly had a spine. Phoenix added tempo and mischief. LA became a skyline, Leslie high post elegance paired with zing size. Utah was literally larger than your TV screen. Cleveland looked like the team that would make you work to beat them by 5. And Houston? Houston had a plan that looked like a dare. Combine Cooper's control with a top college pick at forward, let the minutes roll, and wait for Swoops to arrive like a summer storm.
Phase 3, the college draft, tied the story to the future. With the first pick, Houston selected forward Tina Thompson out of USC, whose mid-range touch, polished post packages, and professional calm made scouts speak in cautions that sounded like compliments. "She's ready," they said, in the tone of people who know exactly what that means. Sacramento took Pamela McGee near the top, betting that experience and scoring could build a floor for a new franchise. Los Angeles used a lottery pick on Stanford point guard Jamila Weideman, an organizer you trusted with a clock. New York added Rutgers stalwart Sue Wicks to its battery of veterans. Cleveland would mine the later rounds and find Merlakia Jones, the kind of wing who scores in the cracks of a game and becomes a team's memory keeper. Somewhere just after the headlines, another future star heard her name. Tamika Dixon, guard, to the Sparks, a player whose years ahead would include a steady climb toward title parades. The college draft did the unglamorous work that leagues never celebrate enough. It brought timelines into alignment. The WNBA now had poster faces, seasoned pros who could win 10 possessions in a row, and rookies whose arcs would anchor the next decade. June 21, 1997, opening night, Los Angeles, Liberty versus Sparks. The Forum fills with 14,000 plus, a crowd heavy with curiosity, and girls in jerseys they'd never been able to buy before. The first basket of the league's life belongs to Penny Toller, a guard whose name will eventually be etched not just on the box score, but in the franchise's DNA as a future general manager. New York wins 67-57, shackling the Sparks' rhythm with defense that feels like a lifetime habit. Terissa Weatherspoon clamps the air out of passing lanes. Kim Hampton throws her shoulders into the paint and makes professional basketball look like manual labor. Rebecca Lobo, still the NCAA's household name, absorbs the attention and uses it like a decoy, freeing teammates to carry the night. Across the country, television audiences discover that this product isn't theoretical. It's not a summer placeholder. It is sports, immediate and legible.
In Houston, Cheryl Swoops waits to give birth. She will make her season debut weeks later, condition herself on the fly, and ease into a role that in most leagues would be reserved for players several months removed from postpartum. She insists on returning when her doctors clear her, with the caveat that nothing, Neither ambition nor adrenaline will undercut safety. The balancing act is personal and historical. In a league that is building itself in public, every decision is an argument and an example. Van Chancellor, the Comets coach, speaks the truth out loud even as he prepares for his star's return. You let anyone lay out a year, Michael Jordan couldn't lay out a year, much less have a babe and come back and be the same. He says it with a coach's worry and a human being's awe. What happens next is a season constructed possession by possession, with the friction and surprise of a pilot episode that should not by any measure look this finished. Cleveland is better than advertised. Charlotte is ornery, the kind of team you hate to see on the second night of a road back-to-back, even though the WNBA summer schedule is merciful to rookies and veterans alike. Utah's Twin Towers look unstoppable on paper, but American pace is a teacher with hard lessons. Phoenix bends toward flair because Michelle Timms bends toward flair, and Jennifer Gillum cashes mid-range jumpers like their savings bonds coming due. Los Angeles is a nightly event because Lisa Leslie is a nightly event. Her post seals sculptural and efficient, her face-up game a problem you can solve only by picking your losses. Xinghai Sia becomes a storyline in warm-ups as much as in box scores. She is proof that the WNBA's tapes are spliced to the rest of the world's. And then there's New York, which wins with compression. Weatherspoon's defense is a hydraulic press, and Kim Hampton's footwork is a tide that dulls the edges of opponents. The Liberty carry themselves like a downtown argument, loud, unyielding, quick to the point.
Houston turns out to be something else again. Cooper's control is not a theory, it's a metronome. She hunts matchups like a chess computer. Hesitation, blow-by, pull-up, probe, kick, relocate, stick the jumper in the same space the defender just vacated, as if the court is a script only she has read. Tina Thompson, as polished as advertised, finds major league poise early. It is the kind of poise that makes fans check the program to make sure she's a rookie. When Swoops returns, her minutes are tracked like precious metals, and even in limited bursts, she changes the geometry of a possession. Once she slides her feet and closes a driving lane without fouling. Once she catches on the wing and makes a defense shift a half step too far. Once she takes a rebound in the crowd and turns it into a fast break before anyone has turned their head. Jeanette Arcane becomes the glue you notice only when it breaks. Because it never breaks, you forget to notice it. Kim Parak, the point guard at the front of it all, plays like a fuse. Short, hot, essential. If Phase 1 had welded stars to markets, and Phase 2 had imported wisdom, Phase 3 now made the whole thing look inevitable. The three-part roster plan didn't land on balance by accident. It arrived there because each team was given the tools to be itself. That mattered in a first season because the league's brand on television, in arenas, in the newspaper quotes that still set the day's sports agenda in 1997, was not just women's basketball. It was matchups you could describe in a sentence. New York's compressing defense versus Houston's patient knife. Phoenix's quicksilver versus Los Angeles's vertical skyline. Charlotte's elbows versus Cleveland's fundamentals. The WNBA's basketball product, in other words, was made legible by design. The tension that runs under the whole story is not in the box scores. It is the pressure of founding myths and the weight of a rival league's early presence. The ABL is playing in winter, paying some stars more, and trying to become the year-round home of women's pro basketball in America. There's no guarantee that the marketplace wants to. Every sellout feels like an answer. Every soft night feels like a question. For the players, many of whom know each other, have played together, have hugged and cried together on podiums, the pressure is personal. They are paid professionals. They are also ambassadors who carry a future on their shoulders every time a stranger in an airport asks where they play. The WNBA's three-part draft is not simply a way to build rosters. It is the league's first serious attempt to control the narrative in a competition that goes beyond standings.
By late July, standings begin to tell a story it's safe to say out loud. Houston is the best team. Not because of blowouts, though there are some, but because the Comets have a habit. They turn close games into dull inevitabilities. They squeeze juice from the middle 8 minutes, late second quarter through early third, when opponents tend to drift. They win the possessions that don't look like they count. A deflection that becomes a broken play, that becomes a kick-out, that becomes 3 points. A switch forced because Swoops slides into the lane like a shadow. A bench stretch where Arcane and Parrott control tempo for 4 crucial minutes. Their record reflects something you can feel, but not quite diagram. Houston reads the blueprint correctly. Veteran craft plus rookie calm plus returning star equals a rhythm the rest of the league can't quite find in sequence. People talk about destiny, Cooper says in one post-practice scrum that summer, smiling the smile of someone who has no interest in magic explanations. But destiny doesn't run a curl cut. She laughs, shakes her head, and adds a line that will show up in future interviews as a shorthand for all this. We just play the right way, and we play hard. A different kind of voice cuts through in another room in another city. They're beatable, Teresa Weatherspoon tells reporters, who ask if the Liberty's regular season losses to Houston have been predictive. They're human. She pauses for effect, then grins. They just haven't shown it yet. The bracket for the inaugural playoffs is simple, almost brutal. Single elimination in the semifinals, single elimination in the final. It is a structure that turns every possession into a moral argument. In one semifinal, Houston stomps Charlotte 70-54, the kind of win that looks inevitable only after it has happened. Cooper scores at will. Thompson looks like a veteran who has guarded her minutes with the jealous care of a career that's already happened. Swoops plays a slice here, a slice there, her movements the kind of efficient you can only be when you're playing for a reason larger than the next contract. In the other semifinal, New York dispatches Phoenix 59-41.
Defending so hard the Mercury looked like a radio station you're losing as you drive out of range. Weatherspoon is not so much a defender as a problem. She moves her feet, wedges her shoulders, taps a dribble away, and dares you to think about something other than the ball. Kim Hampton bodies up, boxes out, leads from the marrow. Sue Wicks arrives elbow first at the right moments and turns mid-range looks into coin flips. Michelle Timms tries to speed the game up, pushes anyway, but the Liberties slow time like a science fiction trick and walk into the final looking like the worst possible opponent for Houston's half-court grace. August 30th, 1997, the Summit. The final is one game, an idea that both simplifies and complicates the stakes. If you love narrative arcs, you might wish for a best of 3. If you love sports, you recognize the thrill of what's about to happen. 40 minutes to write a memory that will be replayed in every future broadcast intro. The cameras find the Comets in the tunnel, a picture that will look grainy and perfect in future documentaries. The cameras find the Liberty. They're huddled tight, the choreography of a team that knows the exact tone it wants to set in the first 3 minutes. Tip: the game begins in mud. It is not art, it is not pace, it is instead proof that these teams know each other too well to play pretty. New York's plan is to drag the game into a narrow hallway and make Houston bump into the walls. Houston's plan is to use patience as a weapon and let the Liberty tire of their own precision. The first quarter is a collection of stops and starts. Weatherspoon picks up 75 feet, an unspoken message in every step. You will feel me the entire night. Hampton touches early post feeds and kicks out, trusting that the shooting percentage will arrive when the nerves leave the building. Vicki Johnson flashes to the elbow, hits once, misses once. On the other end, Cooper takes the temperature of the game. She finds the spots on the floor where the Liberty's defense is spring-loaded and avoids them. Thompson drifts baseline and drifts back. Swoops, minutes managed, slides in space, and helps on drives, her presence bending choices even when she's standing still.
The second quarter unwinds into its own weather pattern. New York keeps the game where it lives. Houston refuses to move into that neighborhood. Kim Parrott jumps a passing lane and creates 2 points out of thin air, the kind of moment that does more than scoreboard math. It changes breathing patterns. Janeth Arcane checks in and leaves fingerprint evidence on a 10-point stretch that will look like a footnote on the page, a corner 3, a hard cut that becomes a foul, a sprint back on defense that turns a 2-on-1 into a reset. When Houston's half-court sticks, Cooper fixes it. She calls for a side clear. She nods Thompson into a ghost screen. She uses the half hedge like a door handle and floats a runner off glass that touches the rim with the gentleness of something you don't want to wake. Halftime finds the Comets ahead by just enough that the building hums with the confidence of a city used to big shows. The locker room is the eye of the storm. Van Chancellor keeps it simple. Push the ball on misses, don't get seduced by girly jump shots, defend without fouling. We are who we are, he says, a coach's cliche that lands like an instruction manual tonight. Across the way, New York head coach Nancy Darsh reminds her team that their plan is working. The goal wasn't to win pretty, it was to be last to blink. They don't like the mud, she says. Stay in it. The third quarter is where the WNBA's future starts to clarify. You can see it in Thompson's timing, a rookie who has no interest in rookie mistakes. You can see it in Swoops' rotations, the kind of defensive GPS that knows where the next action is happening before the ball arrives. You can see it in Cooper's decision-making, which isn't just better than everyone else's, it's calmer. Big possessions shrink under her hands. She dribbles once, twice, rocks right, and hits a pull-up that feels like a release valve. She drives hard, pulls the second defender, and snaps a pass that becomes a Tina Thompson corner jumper with the efficiency of an assembly line. When New York answers, Weatherspoon rips a steal and turns it into a Johnson layup, Hampton outworks two defenders for a putback, Houston answers in 3 possessions in a row, the way great teams do. Stop, score, stop. The scoreboard moves slow enough to make you forget how much the game is tilting.
By mid-fourth, the Liberty are gasping for the kind of run the game has refused to offer. They cut it to 10. Houston stretches it to 13. They get a stop. Houston gets a better one. They force Cooper into a late clock heave. She rebalances and hits it anyway. When the last minute begins, the outcome isn't a twist, it's a signature. The final sequence arrives without fanfare. Cooper dribbles high, eyes on the shot clock, and crafts a possession like a carpenter finishing a table. Measure twice, cut once. A soft crossover left. A rocker step that feels like a memory to the defender. Elevation. Release. Whisper. Net. On the other end, Swoop shades to the nail, discourages a drive without touching a soul, and Tina Thompson, positioned like a thesis statement, pulls down the miss, tucks the ball like a running back, and outlets. The horn ends it, but the story was already told. Houston 65, New York 51. Confetti becomes air. Van Chancellor raises his arms, the posture of a man who has been coaching since before anyone promised him a stage this large. Cooper smiles, lifts her hands, and in a motion that will become a cultural loop, raises the roof. There is resolution in the box, the trophy, the ring, the MVP. But the real resolution is structural and emotional at once. The 3-phase draft wasn't a gimmick, it was a philosophy. It said that identity is an asset you can draft on purpose. It said that veterans, if placed correctly, can accelerate chemistry. It said that rookies, if trusted, will hold under pressure, not just because they're talented, but because they are backed by context. And it said that motherhood and superstardom could coexist in a sport that had never attempted to make that coexistence visible, much less normal. Swoop's minutes were never a test of heroism, they were an exercise in proof of concept. Nothing in this night felt improvised, and yet the whole thing would have been impossible to script.
Some nights in sports are celebrations the moment the clock starts. This night is a coronation only in retrospect. When the buzzer sounds, the WNBA has its first champion and its first myth. Cynthia Cooper, Finals MVP, has turned a decade spent dazzling overseas into an American dynasty's opening chapter. Tina Thompson, the league's first ever college draft pick, has a ring in a rookie year and the kind of stat line that lives in whispers months later, love-lettered by coaches who saw the tape and shook their heads. Sheryl Swoops, a woman who began the season in a hospital gown and finished it in confetti, has laid down a map for athletes who would come after her, to plan, to trust their bodies, and to refuse the binary choice that the sports world had too often drawn for women: family or excellence. The Comets' win is a reading of the WNBA's blueprint as much as it is a team's triumph. Those who were there will remember the horns and the hugs. Those who weren't will remember what came to stand for that moment. The way Cooper controlled the game like a musician controls tempo, speeding up and slowing down in the same bar. The way Kim Parrott put her fingerprints on sequences that swung not the score, but the mood.
The way Janeth Arcane turned a forgotten piece of a box score into a lever. The way Van Chancellor used old truths, defense travels, take care of the ball, and wrapped them around new contexts, TV timeouts, promotional obligations, the glare of being first. And they will remember Weatherspoon, who lost that night but built something else entirely, an ethos that powered New York's early identity and will echo in the league as long as guards hound ball handlers.
The clinching scenes play back like a music video of the future. The broadcast shows girls in the stands hugging, women in team polos crying, a shoot of confetti catching in the hair of adults who don't mind looking ridiculous. Somewhere down the line, in Chicago bars and Atlanta living rooms, in Shanghai dorms and Lagos gyms, young players will watch the re-air of this game and make a note you can't write in a box score. This has weight. This will last. Candace Parker will later explain her first viewings of Cooper with a blunt clarity that feels like a baton pass. I remember watching her number 14 raise the roof, the tremendous passion that she played with. The gesture isn't just celebration, it's a call sign. It tells anyone paying attention that women's pro basketball now has gestures, rituals, muscle memory. What happened after looks, in the stat lines, like dominance so total it becomes impolite to describe. Houston won again in 1998 and 1999 and 2000, 4 straight championships in a league that had to survive a rival's collapse and its own growing pains. Cooper would win 4 consecutive Finals MVPs, a feat that reads like a typo until you consider how relentlessly she turned controlling the moment into a system. Swoops would stack league MVPs and defensive awards and become the living refutation of every old assumption about how athletes return to form after childbirth. Thompson would retire for a long while as the league's all-time leading scorer, a monument to the idea that the first draft pick of a first draft can be a foundation, not a footnote. Kim Parrott's story, victory, illness, death in 1999, sits beside those banners like a memory that hurts and heals at the same time. Her name now stitched to the league's definition of sportsmanship and, more deeply, to its notion of what a point guard is for beyond the stat line.
The larger legacy is the league itself. The forgotten part of 1997 isn't that there was a draft, it's that there were 3. Those 3 phases created velocity and coherence on contact. The allocations welded stars to markets in ways that made opening week feel pre-sold and personal. The elite draft imported a competitive wisdom and international reach that made the WNBA feel less like a startup and more like a continuation, a next chapter that honored what had already been done in gyms around the world. The college draft gave the league a relationship with the NCAA that turned March storylines into July attendance, a continuity that mattered for families deciding to come to games and for broadcasters learning how to build highlights into habits. There are specifics that reveal the architecture at work. New York's early identity, defense first, tempo as a weapon, swagger used sparingly and effectively, comes as much from the elite draft's Kim Hampton and Vicki Johnson as it does from Lobo's star wattage. Phoenix's style, fast, clever, a little mischievous, leans into Michelle Timms' audacity as much as it does into any single scorer's gifts. Los Angeles becomes, quickly, a spectacle worth planning a night around because Lisa Leslie is an event and because Zhang Haixia turns the warm-up line into a story. Cleveland's heart, year after year, is Merlakia Jones, who arrives through these early mechanisms and outlasts a dozen storylines with professional stubbornness. Charlotte's edge, Andrea Stinson's quiet cruelty and mid-range, Vicky Bullett's work ethic, translates into playoff series you wouldn't want to be on the wrong side of. Utah experiments with scale, learning how to use size in a league that is faster and smaller than the eye test suggests. Sacramento grows from grit, line by line, until the Monarchs become the team that proves capital letters don't win games, rosters do.
The template that 1997 sets becomes a language the league still speaks. Expansion years rely on mixes that echo the inaugural solution. Pair stars with markets intelligently, supplement with veterans who carry habits in their pocket, draft collegians who already own their roles. The future's brightest lights, players whose names will headline sold-out nights and dwarf regular season ratings records, grow up in a league that, because of 1997, never had to apologize for existing. By the time signature shoes, max contracts, and noon Eastern debate segments begin to say the name WNBA without qualifiers, that three-phase draft sits back in the attic of memory, dusty and decisive. There is also a cultural ledger you can't write down as easily. The league's first summer sells an idea larger than sports, that structure can create fairness, and fairness can create drama. The allocations choose not to scatter stars randomly, they put them where they make sense and where they can be seen. The elite draft says out loud that experience is not seasoning, it can be the main dish. The college draft insists that the NCAA to pro pipeline is not just a feeder system, but a shared story. Families track their favorite players from March to August. Young athletes see the same names on different jerseys and understand, for the first time, that their college heroes will still be heroes when the diploma arrives. The television product benefits from this clarity. Announcers tell clean stories, graphics teams build simple timelines, editors cut highlights that don't require context paragraphs. It's clean, confident, professional. The league feels like it belongs because it behaves like it belongs.
The forgotten is worth pausing on. Listen to how fans talk about 1997 years later, and you'll hear the usual beats. The first game, the first bucket, the first champion. What slips through is that the rosters didn't just happen. They were manufactured with intention. Walk back through the comments and you can see the blueprint glowing. An allocated star who would arrive late. An allocated veteran whose overseas prime fitted perfectly into a league still learning our angles. An elite draft bench scorer whose international pedigree meant she'd seen more defenses than most rookies know exist. A college pick who would anchor the future while owning the present. A point guard with a leader's voice and a thief's hands. That is not luck. That is assembly. Some of the early rhetoric around the WNBA put its players in commercials and its stories in the lifestyle sections. The basketball arguments took a minute to become the loudest voice in the room. That changed quickly because the games changed it. Say the final score of the first final to a room of early fans, 65-51, and watch their faces do the rest of the talking. They talk about the pace. They talk about the defense. They talk about Cooper's pull-ups and Weatherspoon's posture. They mention the confetti like it's a character. Those are sports memories, not novelty memories. That difference matters because that's how a league becomes a league. You know you've made it when the arguments that surround you are about rotations and shot charts and endgame decisions, not slogans.
There were challenges, then and later, that no draft could fix. The ABL folded in late 1998, a reminder that pioneering almost always includes failure in the neighborhood. Some markets needed more time, more investment, more imagination. Broadcast partners needed to learn when to let the pictures do the talking and when to let the analysts close the gap between old assumptions and new facts. But the thing a draft can do, a thing this three-phase draft did, is make basketball the foundation. That foundation held when attendance dipped in places, when payroll debates got loud, when critics surfaced with the familiar arsenal of bad faith takes. The remedy was and remains games like the ones that closed August of 1997. Clear, competitive, familiar to anyone who loves basketball, and powered by players whose craft is as shareable on a 15-second clip as it is in a 40-minute education. Walk back through the cinematic details of that summer, and you hear a soundtrack that still works. Camera shutters on allocation day as Leslie Lobo swoops, hold basketballs dressed in fresh logos, pen on paper on elite draft lists, the rustle of a TV truck door shutting outside the summit, the arena buzzer, single and sufficient, to punctuate act breaks, the confetti hiss timed to a scoreboard going final. Watch Cooper's raise the roof, and you can almost hear it. The sound of a gesture connecting a room that doesn't know yet it's forming a tradition. Watch Sloops step onto the court for the first time that August, and you hear something else in the applause. Pride braided with relief.
What that summer gives the present is more than mythology. It offers a way to think. Building the WNBA through the 2010s and 2020s has meant coming back to 1997 to steal good ideas, allocate wisely when you expand, invest in veteran pipelines that cross oceans, draft talent that already knows who it is. The league's current start turns, players who crash websites when their jerseys go on sale, who start conversations in rooms where women's sports once lived only as a line item, inherit a stage that was made sturdy by other people's decisions. That's the legacy that matters most. Not the highlight, but the institution. Not the single game, but the habit of making each game count in ways that become cultural rather than episodic.
If you were making a map of influence, you'd draw a line from the summit to today's sold-out nights, from Kim Parrott's voice to the way modern guards command huddles, from Janeth Arcane to the international stars whose arrival today looks like history turning into routine. You draw another line from the sound of Weatherspoon's defense to the way whole teams choose identity in a league where individual stardom is as visible as the logo on the floor. You draw a line from a television camera catching a mother holding a trophy to every player who has since asked for and received structure and respect around pregnancy and return. If you made it all the way through this first chapter of the WNBA's story, you're our kind of basketball lifer. If the blueprint behind Houston's rise and the league's survival grabbed you, tap subscribe and hit like so this film reaches more fans. Then tell us in the comments, which piece of that three-phase 1997 roster experiment mattered most? The allocations, the elite draft, or the college picks? And why? Your take might shape our next deep dive.